Part 1. The Thing He Built. The smell hit you first. Gear oil, warm and thick, the kind that had soaked into concrete floors over 2 decades and would not wash out. Brake compound underneath it, sharp as old metal sitting in summer heat. And beneath both of those, something harder to name, something ambient and specific to this place, the accumulated scent of engine work done honestly absorbed into painted cinder block walls and the grain of wood shelving and the pores of a man who had spent 20 years getting it right. Briggs Automotive sat on Route 7 in Lakemore, a modest building with a generous parking lot and 4 bays that faced the road like an open invitation. On a Saturday afternoon in late September, the light came through the bay doors at a low angle and fell across the floor in long, slanted rectangles. 3 of the bays held vehicles in various stages of attention. Bay 1 had a pickup truck awaiting a brake inspection that would begin Monday. Bay 2 held a minivan with its hood up and open service file on the fender. Bay 3 was clear. Bay 4 held a dark blue sedan that Calvin Briggs had just finished. He stood beside it with a shop rag in one hand and the particular stillness of a man who has completed something difficult and is letting the completion settle before he moves on. Calvin was 49 years old. His shoulders were broad and unhurried, the build of a man who had been lifting, torquing, and pulling things into alignment since before most of the cars on Route 7 had left the factory. His hands were large and deliberate, the kind of hands that knew the difference between snug and tight, without needing a gauge to confirm it, the kind that had developed their knowledge through thousands of repetitions over decades, and had stopped needing to think about what they already knew. His hair was cropped close, salt beginning to overtake pepper at the temples. His face carried the particular quality of a man who had decided sometime in his 30s that calm was not the absence of feeling. It was the presence of discipline. It was a choice he made every day, the same way he chose to open the shop at 7 and to answer every call on the second ring. He wiped the rag across his right palm, turned it over, wiped the other side. He set the rag on the edge of the tool chest and looked at the sedan. 7 hours. That was how long the transmission rebuild had taken. The part had been sourced from a distributor 3 counties east, ordered 4 days ahead, because Calvin had read the service history, read the mileage, read the wear pattern in the test data, and called the failure before the customer knew it was coming. He had pulled the transmission on Tuesday morning, cataloged the wear, ordered the parts by noon. The clutch packs had been replaced Thursday. The valve body rebuilt Friday. The reinstallation and torque sequence had taken the first 4 hours of Saturday. He had completed it at 11:43 and written the completion time in the service log in the same hand he used for everything, clear-angled, unhurried. The work order was clipped to the sun visor where Calvin always put it. Customer name, phone number, vehicle identification number, service date, parts used with part numbers and costs. Technician signature. Calvin Briggs in ink at the bottom of the form. Legible, dated, complete. On the wall near Bay 3 behind the first lift hung a framed certificate. The frame was not expensive and the certificate was not large, but it was centered on the wall with a level he had used himself, and it sat under glass that he cleaned with the same attention he gave to everything in this shop. The Automotive Service Excellence Master Technician. Certification. All 8 credentials listed by category: engine repair, automatic transmission, and transaxle manual, drivetrain and axle suspension and steering brakes, electrical and electronic systems, heating and air conditioning engine performance, every one of them, the only complete set within 40 miles of Lakemore. Calvin had earned them over 11 years, one at a time. He had studied at night after the shop closed, sitting at the kitchen table with the technical manual spread out and the house gone quiet. The process was methodical and without glamour. Read the material, understand the system, apply the knowledge under test conditions, pass. Then begin the next one. He did not talk about the certifications much. They were on the wall because they were true, and they stayed on the wall because they continued to be true. That was enough. He had opened the shop at 30 with a single bay, a used lift he paid off over 2 years, and a set of hand tools he had been accumulating since he was 18. He built it from that. Not through grants or loans or favors owed through work. Through a reputation built on one honest repair at a time. One invoice that came in exactly as quoted. One call returned on the same day it was made. Over 12 years, the single bay became 4. The used lift was joined by a second, then a third. The hand tools were joined by diagnostic equipment, a parts washer, a cabinet full of specialty sockets and adapters. He hired 2 mechanics. He managed them the way he managed everything else, by example, by standard, by the expectation that the work would be done correctly, and that there was no acceptable variation on that point. 9 years ago, Fire Chief Marcus Pell had walked into the shop on a Tuesday afternoon and offered Calvin the fire department service contract. 4 fire trucks, 2 rescue vehicles. Pell had done his research before the visit. He knew the certifications, knew the town reputation, knew that the shop had not had a single documented complaint in the years it had been operating. He named the contract terms. Calvin looked at the vehicles, drove them, assessed their condition, and named a price. They shook hands in this same parking lot. The contract had renewed every year since without renegotiation because there was nothing to renegotiate. The invoices were accurate. The vehicles ran. The relationship was simple. The town maintenance fleet had followed 2 years later 11 vehicles, routine service intervals, and whatever came up. Calvin serviced them the same way he serviced everything, correctly. Fire Chief Pell's number was in Calvin's phone under a contact label that read, "Fire First." Calvin had put it there because if Pell called, it was not a social call. The label was a reminder of what the call would be about, so there would be no delay in understanding and no delay in response. At the workbench near Bay, Darius Briggs was cleaning a set of brake calipers. He was 16, lean in the way of a young man who is not yet filled out but carries himself with the quiet authority of someone who knows what he is doing. He had been in this shop since he was 3 years old. His first memory of the building was the sound of an air ratchet from the direction of the lift and the specific weight of his father's work shirt when Calvin had picked him up and set him on the edge of the tool chest to keep him out of the way of the floor. The shirt had smelled exactly like this building smelled now. He had learned to read a torque specification before he learned to parallel park. He knew which tool lived in which drawer of the chest, and he knew which drawer was stiff in summer humidity and which one ran smooth. He knew the lift in Bay 2 had a hydraulic valve that needed a second push to engage fully, and he knew that the second push had to be deliberate, not forceful, deliberate. He had learned the distinction from watching his father apply it. He did not talk much in the shop. Neither did Calvin. They communicated in the language of the work itself, the angle of a trouble light handed over without a word the particular wrench offered before it was asked for the shared silence of 2 people who understood the same thing without needing to name it. The silence in this shop was not empty. It was full of shared knowledge. Calvin looked over at him. Darius was running a small wire brush along the edge of a caliper bracket, not hurrying, doing it correctly. He did not look up, but something in the angle of his shoulders indicated he knew he was being watched. Calvin said, "The sedan is done. We're going to take it out." Darius set down the brush. He set down the can of brake cleaner. He did not ask where or for how long. He already knew what taking it out meant. Test driving a rebuilt transmission was not optional. You drove it under road load at highway speed and through acceleration events, through gear changes and deceleration to confirm that the rebuild held before you handed the vehicle back to the person who trusted you with it. Darius had ridden in the passenger seat on these test drives a dozen times since he was old enough to be useful in the shop. He understood what they were for. He pulled off his shop gloves, set them on the workbench, and followed his father to the sedan. Route 7 ran south from the commercial district into the residential neighborhoods of Lakemore and then out into the surrounding county. 4 lanes near the town center, narrowing to 2 past the old orchard property where a housing development had been proposed and abandoned. Calvin had driven this road 10,000 times. He knew where the pavement buckled in the first hard freeze of winter. He knew where the drainage ran slow after 3 days of rain, and where it pooled before the county repaved the shoulder in the 3rd year of the last administration. He knew the exact point where the road widened after the junction, and where the reflectors had been replaced, and where they had not. The sedan pulled out of the lot and turned south on Route 7. The transmission shifted up through 1st and 2nd without hesitation. No shudder, no delay. Calvin kept his hands at the natural position on the wheel and listened to the vehicle the way a doctor listens to a chest. Not for one particular sound, but for the full pattern of sounds for what was there and what was not. Darius watched the road. He had inherited his father's habit of watching things carefully, though he had not yet identified it as an inheritance. He thought it was just how you looked at things when you had been taught to pay attention. Behind them, 1 car back and 2 lanes over a patrol unit had been covering the same stretch of Route 7 for the last 6 weeks. Officer Neil Greer worked the afternoon shift and had made a practice of running plates on vehicles he did not recognize driven by people he did not recognize on a road he had come to consider his territory. In 6 weeks he had made 12 traffic stops on Route 7. 9 had produced nothing actionable. 2 had generated minor citations. 1 was awaiting a court date. He had seen the blue sedan pull out of the lot of Briggs Automotive. He had not recognized the vehicle. He had entered the plate number. The plates came back registered to a name that was not Calvin Briggs. Greer activated his lights. Calvin saw the red and blue in the rearview mirror. He did not tighten his hands on the wheel. He took a breath, checked his speed, checked the shoulder ahead for a safe place to pull over. He found the next gravel section and eased the sedan onto it, bringing the vehicle to a stop, with the precision of a man who has been doing everything carefully for 20 years. He put the transmission in park. He placed both hands at the top of the steering wheel where they could be seen through the front windshield. Darius went still in the passenger seat. Not the stillness of relaxation, the stillness of recognition. Of a 16-year-old boy who understood in the specific way that black boys in America come to understand it, what the lights in the rearview mirror could mean, and what the correct behavior was, and why the correct behavior was necessary. Calvin had not taught him with a formal lesson. He had taught him the way all such things are taught by example over time in the accumulation of small moments that add up to knowledge. He held his hands where they could be seen, and he waited. Behind them, Greer's patrol unit sat idling on the shoulder light, still running the officer inside, making a note before he got out of the car. Part 2, First Contact. Greer walked to the driver's window of the sedan. He was 34, broad across the neck and jaw, with the unhurried stride of a man who expects others to wait for him. He had been on the Lakemore force for 7 years, and had developed over those years a particular way of approaching situations, leading with authority. Before he had established the basis for it, asking questions, as though the answers were a formality rather than information. He wore his uniform well and maintained his equipment meticulously. He believed in the work. He had simply over time begun to confuse the work with himself. He looked at Calvin. He looked at Darius. He looked at the interior of the sedan. He said the vehicle was registered to someone other than the driver, and he would like to understand the situation. He did not say the vehicle's registration doesn't match your name. Can you explain that? He said he would like to understand, as though the situation were inherently suspicious until explained to his satisfaction. Calvin said, with his hand still visible on the steering wheel, he was a mechanic. The vehicle belonged to a customer. He had completed a transmission rebuild on it that morning and was conducting a test drive before returning it to the owner. The work order was clipped to the sun visor. The customer's registration was in the glove compartment. Greer looked at the work order clipped to the sun visor. It was visible from where he was standing. The customer's name was on it. The vehicle identification number was on it. Calvin's shop name was on it in printed lettering at the top of the form. Calvin's signature was at the bottom. Greer said he would like Calvin to step out of the vehicle first and they could review the documents afterward. That word was the sentence. First. Not let me look at the work order and we will sort this out quickly. Not if the documents check out we are done here in 2 minutes. First. Step out first. The documents would come after. The explanation Calvin had offered the documents he had identified the logical resolution sitting 3 feet away on the sun visor, all of that could wait. Getting Calvin out of the vehicle could not. Calvin understood what first meant. He had understood that kind of first for a long time. He opened the door slowly, using the kind of deliberate, unhurried movement that communicates clearly. There is nothing happening here that should alarm anyone. He stepped out onto the gravel shoulder and stood at his full height beside the open door. His posture was straight, not rigid, not performative. Simply the natural posture of a man who stands correctly because he always has. His hands were at his sides, visible open. Darius stayed in the passenger seat. He did not move. He sat with his hands in his lap and his eyes tracking carefully everything that was happening outside the window. Greer asked where did the vehicle come from and where was Calvin going with it. Calvin repeated what he had said at the window. His shop, Briggs Automotive, was on Route 7, approximately 2.5 miles north. The customer had brought the vehicle in 4 days earlier. The service was a complete transmission rebuild, begun Tuesday, completed that morning. He was driving the vehicle south on Route 7 as part of a standard post-repair test drive and would return north when the assessment was complete. The work order on the sun visor had his shop name, the vehicle identification number, the customer's name, and his signature. The customer's registration in the glove compartment would match all of that. He offered to retrieve the work order. Greer said he would get to the documents in a moment. In the passenger seat, Darius registered this. He had been around this shop long enough to understand what a work order was, what it contained, and what it proved. He had watched his father prepare them, file them, review them when a customer had a question. He knew that the work order clipped to the sun visor, visible from outside the vehicle, was a complete account of how Calvin Briggs came to be in possession of this car. He knew it. Greer could see it. Greer had decided the documents could wait. Greer asked how long Calvin had been a mechanic in Lakemore. Calvin said 20 years. Greer asked if he had identification. Calvin said yes and produced his wallet. His driver's license was in the front slot. He handed it to Greer. Greer looked at the license. He made a note. He handed it back. He asked again in slightly different words where Calvin had come to be in possession of this vehicle, not where the shop was, not what the work order said, but the specific question of how he had come to be holding the keys. Calvin said the customer dropped the vehicle at the shop 4 days ago and left the keys with the service desk, which is standard practice for a repair of this duration. The keys are in the ignition because the vehicle is in operation. The vehicle belongs to the customer whose name is on the work order 3 feet to Greer's left. Greer said he understood that, but he wanted to verify a few things before they looked at documents. A pickup truck passed on Route 7. The driver slowed. Calvin could not see who it was. The truck accelerated and continued south. Greer radioed in the plates again. This was the second call. The first had come back with the customer's name, which did not match Calvin's license. The second call went to dispatch to confirm. In the passenger seat, Darius watched his father. He had known those hands since he was 3 years old. He had watched them rebuild carburetors and differentials and full engine assemblies. He had watched them write torque specifications in the service log with the same precision that surgeons use instruments. He had watched them work on the town's fire trucks for 9 years on the vehicle that carried Lakemore's firefighters to whatever was burning, and he had understood for as long as he could understand anything that those hands were responsible for something real. He watched them now, visible at Calvin's sides open, doing nothing, waiting. The delivery van came south on Route 7 with the logo of a parts supplier on its side panel. The driver had dropped parts at Briggs Automotive 4 times in the last 2 years. He recognized the shop name printed on the back of Calvin's work shirt. He slowed, pulling slightly toward the shoulder. He watched for a moment. He did not stop. He accelerated again and was 200 yards past by the time he moved back to highway speed. Greer's radio crackled. Dispatch confirmed the vehicle was registered to the name visible on the work order clipped to the sun visor of the vehicle. Before Greer could act on the confirmation, a second vehicle pulled off Route 7 and stopped behind the patrol unit. A pickup truck older model with a man in his 60s behind the wheel, heavy-set gray beard, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He had been driving south when he recognized the blue sedan, and then he had recognized the man standing on the shoulder in the work shirt with the shop name on the back. His name was Roy Delacroix. He had used Briggs Automotive for his truck service 4 times, once for brakes, once for a full exhaust replacement, twice for scheduled maintenance. He had sat in the waiting area of the shop on Route 7 and watched Calvin explain what needed to be done with the kind of patient, precise clarity that made you trust a person before you had consciously decided to. Delacroix got out of his pickup and walked forward past the patrol unit to where Greer was standing. He said, "Officer," he said, "I know this man. That is Calvin Briggs. He runs the shop on Route 7, Briggs Automotive. He services the town's fire trucks. He has been on this road for 20 years. Greer looked at Delacroix. He said, "Thank you, sir." He said it with the flat courtesy of someone who has heard something and assigned it a category and moved on. He asked Delacroix to return to his vehicle. Delacroix stood for a moment. He looked at Calvin. Calvin gave him a small nod. Not theatrical, not a signal. Simply the acknowledgement of a man who sees what someone has done for him and wants that person to know it has been seen. Delacroix held the look for a moment, then walked back to his truck. Greer walked to the passenger window and looked at the work order on the sun visor. He looked at the registration in the glove compartment. He compared the vehicle identification numbers. He compared the names. He closed the glove compartment. He walked back to Calvin. He said, "The documents check out. You are free to go." He said it without apology, without any acknowledgement of the 11 minutes that had passed, without any acknowledgement of the witness who had named the shop, named the fire trucks, named 20 years on this road and been thanked and sent away. Calvin said, "I understand." He said it in the same tone he used when a part came in wrong and had to go back. Not pleased, not confrontational, simply accurately. He got back into the sedan. Before he could put the vehicle in drive, Greer appeared again at the window. He said the vehicle looks like it could have used more than just the transmission. Calvin looked at him. He said the transmission was the primary concern. The vehicle is in good working order. Greer nodded. He said, "As long as it is roadworthy." He said it the way people say things that are not compliments and know it with the particular vocal flatness that communicates dismissal while maintaining the technical form of a neutral statement. Calvin said it is. He put the transmission in drive and pulled back onto Route 7. They drove north. Neither of them spoke. The sedan shifted up through its gears without hesitation or shudder, the transmission behaving exactly as a transmission should after a rebuild done correctly. Calvin listened to it as he drove the professional attention to the vehicle sitting underneath the other thing he was carrying. He drove the full test route 2 miles south the turn at the junction 2 miles north before pulling back into the lot at Briggs Automotive. He parked, put the transmission in park, turned off the engine. He sat for a moment. Then he looked at Darius. Darius was looking at the dashboard. His jaw was set in the composed way of a young man who has decided not to display what he is feeling, which is one of the most expensive decisions a 16-year-old can make, and one of the most necessary. Calvin did not say anything. He did not have the right words yet. He would not have them for a while. He got out of the sedan and went back into the shop. At 4:58 that afternoon, Greer filed his incident report from the patrol unit before the end of his shift. The report said traffic stop, Route 7, vehicle registered to third party, registration verified against work order located in vehicle. Situation resolved. The report did not indicate that the driver had identified himself and offered documentation before being asked to exit. It did not indicate that a witness had stopped voluntarily and identified the driver by name, by business name, and by the town service contract. It did not indicate the elapsed time between the stop and the documentation check. It did not indicate 11 minutes. The report said resolved. 2 words past tense, filed and closed. The following morning, the customer called to confirm the test drive was complete and the vehicle was ready for pickup. Calvin said yes. The customer asked if everything had gone all right out there. Calvin looked across the shop. Darius was at the workbench 8 feet away, running a wire brush over a bracket, not looking up. Calvin said yes, everything was fine. He said it because Darius was 8 feet away and Calvin had not yet decided what to tell his son about the shoulder of Route 7. He had not decided because he did not yet know what the truth of it was going to be, not the facts of it which he knew completely, but the meaning of it. The part you hand to a 16-year-old when you are trying to tell him something true about the world without breaking something in him that will take years to rebuild. He had not decided, but he was thinking about it. He would think about it every morning for the next 3 weeks. Part 3, The Weight That Stays. 3 weeks. The shop opened at 7 and closed at 6. Calvin was in at 6:45 most mornings, making coffee in the back office, reviewing the service log for the day's vehicles, clearing phone messages, making the calls that needed to be made before the calls he had to take started coming in. Darius came after school on weekdays, spent Saturdays in the shop from opening to closing, and had dinner at the kitchen table on Sunday evenings, when they would sometimes talk about what the week had held and sometimes just eat without talking. The stop on Route 7 was not discussed, not once, not directly. It was present in the shop the way things are present when they are not spoken, in the particular kind of quiet that fell when a patrol unit passed on Route 7 and was visible through the open bay doors, and neither of them acknowledged having seen it. In the way Darius sometimes paused what he was doing and looked at the road for 2 or 3 seconds before going back to work. In the half-second of silence before Calvin answered certain calls, as though he was taking a breath first. The Monday after the stop, Calvin called his attorney. The call lasted 11 minutes. He described the stop precisely in chronological order, with the same attention to sequence and detail that he brought to documenting a repair departure time from the shop, the route Greer's activation of his lights, what was said at the driver's window, the instruction to exit the sequence of questions on the shoulder, the first radio call, the neighbor who had stopped and named the shop and been dismissed. The second radio call, the documents review, the final exchange, the elapsed time. He did not add interpretation. He gave the facts. That evening he sat at the kitchen table and wrote it out in longhand. 45 minutes. His handwriting was the same pen, the same angle, the same pressure he used when he wrote torque specifications in the service log. He noted the work order number, the customer's name, the date and time of the stop, the vehicle identification number, the name, and approximate description of the witness who had stopped, the exact phrases he could recall from each exchange. He sealed the document in an envelope and delivered it to his attorney's office the following morning. He did not discuss it with Darius. He had not yet decided what to do with it. He was not sure filing something would change anything. He was not sure it would not. He was sure of the envelope. He was sure of the handwriting and the facts in it. He kept the options open and continued to work. Greer in those same 3 weeks did not think about the stop on Route 7. He had filed the report. The report said resolved. There had been 200 similar entries in his service record over 3 years. He had no particular memory of the blue sedan or the man in the work shirt. The shop name printed on the back of the shirt had not registered as significant when he wrote the report, because significance required a kind of attention to context that the report form did not prompt, and that Greer had not chosen to apply. He did not know about the fire department contract. He did not know about the 9 years of service. He did not know about the 8 certifications on the wall. He did not know that the town's fire trucks, the vehicles that responded to every structure, fire, every brush fire, every building collapse, every medical emergency requiring heavy rescue, were serviced by the man he had held on the shoulder of Route 7 for 11 minutes about a vehicle whose documentation was visible 3 feet from where Greer had been standing. He did not know Darius's name. In the shop, Darius worked. He changed oil, rotated tires, assisted on brake jobs, held the trouble light under vehicles during diagnosis, cleaned and organized the tool chests, handled parts when they came in. He had been good at the work for 2 years now, not good in the way of someone praised for effort, but good in the way of someone who has absorbed a craft through long, close proximity to someone who does it correctly. He understood what the numbers in a torque specification meant and why they were not suggestions. He could read a wiring diagram and trace a circuit. He had learned to diagnose brake noise by the side of the car it came from, by whether it appeared under load or at rest, by the pitch of it at different speeds. He had learned these things without being formally taught them, through the accumulation of time in a place where expertise was practiced every day. He had 13 years of watching his father in this shop. He knew what precision looked like. He knew what patience looked like. He knew what it looked like when a man remained entirely composed in a situation designed to make composure difficult. He had watched his father refuse over and over to become something smaller than what he was in response to circumstances that pushed for it. He had watched the shoulder of Route 7 3 weeks ago. He had not said anything about it. He had been watching his father since he was 3, and he knew what Calvin did with things he was not ready to discuss. He kept them. He worked beside them. He let them sit in the space between two people until the right words developed. The right words had not developed yet for either of them. On a Thursday evening in the 3rd week, Calvin was finishing a routine service on one of the town maintenance trucks, an older pickup used by the Parks Department. Oil and filter change, brake inspection, a worn serpentine belt he had flagged at the last service and now replaced. Darius was under the rear frame with the trouble light holding it at the correct angle without being asked to adjust it. Calvin said, "You see this bearing here?" Darius said, "Yeah." Calvin said, "When it goes, it will not announce itself. It will just be gone. You look for the wear before it fails." Darius said, "How do you know when to look?" Calvin said, "You look every time." He said it with the same quality he brought to all instruction in the shop, as a matter of practice, not of lesson, as if the looking were the most natural thing in the world, and the only question was whether you brought the right attention to it or let the attention slip, because nothing had failed yet. Darius adjusted the light, slightly improving the angle without being asked. He had been doing this for years, the small adjustments, the anticipation of what his father needed before the need was stated. It was a language they had developed together in this shop over 13 years, and it was one of the fluent languages of Calvin's life. He wiped down the torque wrench and hung it in its place. They were quiet for a while. Route 7 was audible through the open bay door. The passing vehicles, the wind in the overhead lines, the particular sound of a town in the early evening settling into the transition between work and rest. On the north side of Lakemore, inside the firehouse bay, the primary tanker sat in its position. Calvin had serviced it 8 months earlier, oil and coolant brakes electrical inspection. During that inspection, he had noted the solenoid relay and written it in the service log as a component approaching the end of its expected service life to be monitored and replaced at the next interval. The next interval was scheduled for 3 weeks from that Thursday. The relay had been holding. It had been holding longer than the conservative estimate Calvin had used when flagging it. This was not unusual. Components often lasted past the point where caution recommended replacement. But the margin was narrow. The relay was functioning on the residual reliability of contacts that had been cycling for longer than they should. Calvin did not know this Thursday evening. He was under a truck with his son, looking for wear before it failed. He was thinking about bearings and torque and the accumulated knowledge of 20 years. He was also somewhere below all of that, still thinking about the envelope on his attorney's desk. He closed the hood on the maintenance truck. He said, "Let's close up." Darius turned off the trouble light. They went through the end-of-day sequence. Calvin did not discuss the stop because Darius was here and Calvin had not yet found the right frame for it. He was still looking for the where before the failure. He had not decided yet where the failure was and whether it was already behind them or still in front. At 6:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, 11 days after the Thursday under the maintenance truck, Calvin was locking the shop when his phone rang. The contact label read "Fire" first. He answered on the second ring. Part 4, what he carried going in. Fire Chief Pell's voice was measured the way it always was, but underneath the control there was urgency. He said the primary tanker would not start. They had a brush fire southeast of town, 16 acres wind from the northeast at approximately 11 miles per hour. The fire was moving toward Westhaven Estates. 14 homes, 31 residents. He had already tried the auxiliary from neighboring county. The auxiliary was 40 minutes out and committed to another active call. They had been trying to start the tanker for 14 minutes. Calvin said, "I'm on my way." He did not ask how bad the fire was. He had heard the numbers and he could calculate what they meant. 16 acres of dry brush moving northeast at that wind speed, no tanker, no viable mutual aid for 40 minutes. He did not need more information. He needed to move. He ended the call and went directly to the back of his truck. He opened the parts tray, the organized plastic bin he kept behind the driver's seat with the components that failed most frequently on the vehicles he serviced. He had built this tray over 9 years of the fire department contract, noting which parts failed and when, building a small inventory of the things he would need to have immediately available if a vehicle failed during a response. He ran his fingers along the rows. He found the solenoid relay. 2 of them. Correct model, correct specification, correct fit for the tanker's engine configuration. He had sourced them 8 months ago when he flagged the original relay in the service log on the understanding that it was better to have the part and not need it than to need it and spend 40 minutes waiting for a delivery. He got in his truck. Darius was at school. Calvin did not call him. There was nothing for Darius to do at the firehouse, and Calvin did not have time to explain and wait for a response. He drove. He drove north on Route 7 without turning on the radio. He knew the firehouse. He had been inside it dozens of times. He knew where the vehicles were positioned in the bays, knew the layout of the engine compartments of every vehicle in the fleet, knew the specific quirks of each one which required the battery disconnect before certain electrical work, which had a drain that pooled near the rear axle, which had a fuel filter that was harder to access than the manual suggested. He knew the primary tanker. He had worked on it in this current configuration for 9 years. He knew what it looked like when everything was right. He knew what it sounded like when it started cleanly. He knew the service log entry from 8 months ago written in his own handwriting flagging the relay. He had been thinking on some level about that relay for 8 months. Not with alarm, not with obsession, but with the background attention of a professional who has identified something that will eventually need to be addressed and has made the necessary preparation and is waiting to see when. The answer to when was now. He arrived at the firehouse at 12:03. The crew was staged near the rear lot. 2 firefighters in full gear, a third pulling on his coat, the engineer standing near the tanker bay door. Pell was at the engine compartment of the tanker with his phone in his hand. His expression, the expression of a man watching a clock he cannot stop. He looked up when Calvin's truck pulled in. Calvin stepped out. He put on his shop gloves. He walked to the engine compartment without pausing to speak. Pell would tell him anything relevant, and if Pell did not speak, then the relevant information was in the engine compartment. He did not ask what had already been tried. He began at the beginning of the diagnostic sequence, battery connections, first main ground ignition circuit. He verified each one by hand and by meter. All solid. He turned the ignition key himself and listened to the circuit. He heard what he had expected to hear. Power to the circuit. Solenoid not engaging. Starter not turning. Engine not cycling. He checked the relay. He put his meter on it and read the resistance. He looked at the contact housing. At 12:14, 11 minutes after arriving, Calvin had confirmed the diagnosis. Failed solenoid relay. The contacts had degraded past reliable function, probably over the previous week, the last of their useful life used up in the high cycle demand of a vehicle that started and moved frequently. He walked to his truck. He took out one of the 2 relays from the parts tray. He walked back to the tanker. He removed the failed relay and set it aside. He installed the replacement. He checked the connection at both ends of the circuit. He tested the new contacts with the meter. He checked the ground at the starter terminal. He confirmed battery voltage was within the expected range under anticipated load. He closed the engine compartment. He walked to the cab. He climbed up to the driver's position. He turned the key. The engine started. It started cleanly, without hesitation, without complaint, the way an engine starts when every component in its circuit is functioning as it was designed to function. The sound of it ran through the firehouse bay and out into the lot. Pell, standing at the side of the vehicle, exhaled through his nose and looked at the sky for a half-second. Calvin stepped down from the cab. He said, "Solenoid relay. I flagged it at the last service interval, had the part in the truck. Check the log, it is documented. The vehicle is ready." Pell said, "How long did that take?" Calvin said, 37 minutes from arrival. "It is good." Pell gave the order to mount. The crew moved. The tanker pulled out of the bay in the particular slow, deliberate way of a large vehicle carrying a great deal of weight and a great deal of urgency. It joined the response unit that had been holding at the fire perimeter. The two vehicles worked the 16-acre fire through the afternoon water application. At the advancing front hand line work at the flanks, foam at the ridge crest where the brush was driest, a backfire line along the eastern edge to remove fuel ahead of the spread. The fire was contained before it reached Westhaven Estates. The brush line held 200 yards from the nearest home. The auxiliary tanker from the neighboring county was stood down at 2:47 in the afternoon. It was no longer needed. 14 homes, 31 residents. The fire did not reach them. Calvin drove back to Route 7. He pulled into the lot at Briggs Automotive and sat in his truck for a moment. The afternoon was quieting toward evening. The light was low and amber, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they have been waiting to be noticed. He looked at the shop building, the 4 bays, the sign, the parking lot he had repaved 4 years ago when the cracking got bad. The master technician certification on the wall that you could see through the window of Bay 3 if the light was right. He had done this work for 20 years. He had done it correctly. He had kept the preparation current. He had put the relay in the parts tray because he had read the service log and understood what the log was telling him, and he had understood that the right response to that information was to be ready. That was it. That was all of it. He got out of the truck and went inside to finish the day's paperwork. That evening, Darius came home from school and found Calvin at the kitchen table. He said, "You were not at the shop today, not the afternoon." Calvin said, "I had a call, the fire department tanker." Darius sat down. He said, "The fire on the ridge." Calvin said, "Yes." Darius said, "Is everyone okay?" Calvin said, "Everyone is okay. Westhaven is okay. The tanker is running." Darius was quiet for a moment, processing the information in the particular sequential way he processed mechanical problems from cause to component to repair to outcome. He said, "What was wrong with it?" Calvin said, "The solenoid relay. I flagged it at the last service interval 8 months ago. Had the replacement in the truck." Darius said, "The relay you flagged in the log." Calvin said, "Yes." Darius said, "So you knew it was coming." Calvin said, "I knew it was likely. You prepare for what is likely. That is the job." Darius looked at the table. Then he looked at his father. He was putting things together, not just the repair, not just the relay, but the 9 years of contract service, the service log, the parts, tray in the truck, the preparation that came from paying attention. He was putting together what it meant to do a job correctly over a long time, what the accumulation of that looked like when the moment came. He was also somewhere behind that, still putting together the shoulder of Route 7. Still carrying it. Still working out how the two things, the shoulder and the firehouse, the 11 minutes and the 37 minutes, existed in the same 3-week period in the life of the same man. He had not found the right words for it yet. Neither had Calvin. They sat at the kitchen table for a while without talking, and the quiet was not empty. Part 5, 3 times. The press conference was held the following morning at 10 o'clock in front of the firehouse on the north side of Lakemore. Chief Pell had requested it the previous evening and had spoken to the city manager and the communications director and 2 of the 5 council members who had already called him to ask about the fire containment. He had asked for a podium and 30 minutes and no particular ceremony. He had something to say, and he wanted to say it in front of the correct people. The morning was clear and cool, early autumn at its most honest. The sky, the flat, bright blue that follows a string of dry days. A small crowd had gathered at the front of the firehouse bay. The city manager, 3 council members, a representative from the county emergency management office, 2 reporters from the regional newspaper and the local television affiliate, a staff photographer, and several of the firefighters from the previous afternoon's response. Calvin arrived in his truck and parked at the edge of the lot. He was in clean work clothes, not his good clothes, his clean work clothes. The distinction was intentional. This was a working morning. He had a vehicle on the lift at 1 o'clock. He stood to the left of the podium and waited. Darius was standing near the firehouse bay door. Calvin had called him that morning early before the shop opened. He had said, "Come to the firehouse at 10. He had not explained further. Darius had said, "Yes, sir." He had arrived at 9:55 and found a place near the bay door where he could see clearly without being in the way. He was 16. He had been in this town his whole life. He had been in his father's shop his whole life. He stood near the bay door with his hands in the front pockets of his jeans and watched the proceedings begin. Pell stepped to the podium. He spoke clearly and without notes in the direct cadence of a man who has spent his career saying difficult things to people who need to hear them accurately. He described the fire. He described the conditions, the 16 acres, the northeast wind. The projected path toward Westhaven Estates, the auxiliary tanker committed to another call 40 minutes away. He described the crew's response once the tanker was operational, the line work, the eastern backfire, the containment at the ridge. He described the outcome. Then he paused. He said, "I want to talk about what made this containment possible." He looked at the people in front of him. He looked at Calvin. He said, "When we called for that tanker to stage, it would not start. We had been trying for 14 minutes. We had a fire moving toward 14 homes and no way to get water there. In that situation, I made one call." He said, "I called Calvin Briggs." He looked at Calvin when he said the name. Calvin did not look at the cameras. He did not look at the reporters. He was looking at something else. Pell said, "Calvin Briggs runs Briggs Automotive on Route 7. He has held the service contract for this department's vehicles for 9 years, without a single complaint, without a single missed service interval, without a single vehicle returned to us in worse condition than it left. He holds all 8 Automotive Service Excellence Master Technician certifications, the only technician within 40 miles of this town with a complete set of all 8. He said he arrived at this firehouse 11 minutes after I called him. He diagnosed the failure in 11 minutes. He had the replacement part in his truck because at the previous service interval 8 months ago, he had identified that component as approaching the end of its useful life, sourced the replacement part on his own initiative and kept it ready in case it was needed. He said he had our tanker running in 37 minutes. The crew made the response. We held the fire 200 yards from Westhaven Estates. 31 residents did not lose their homes. And that is because Calvin Briggs did his job correctly, did it consistently over 9 years, and was prepared for this moment 8 months before it came." He stopped. He looked at his notes. He looked up again. He said, "Calvin Briggs saved this town yesterday. This town should know his name." He had said the name 3 times. The television camera was on Calvin. The reporters were writing. The city manager was listening with the expression of a man who understands exactly what he is hearing and what it will mean. Calvin was looking at Darius. He had turned toward the bay door at some point during Pell's remarks, and he had not turned back. Darius was standing near the door with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on his father. He was 16. He had been watching his father work since he was 3 years old. He had been watching with the particular attention of a young person who understands that what they are seeing is important. Not important in a general way, but important in the specific and irreducible way of a thing that will define what they believe is possible. 3 weeks before this morning, he had been in the passenger seat of a blue sedan on the shoulder of Route 7. He had watched his father stand on that shoulder in his work shirt for 11 minutes, answering questions about a vehicle his father had rebuilt that morning, while the documentation that answered every question sat clipped to the sun visor 3 feet from where the officer was standing. He had watched a neighbor name the shop name, the fire truck's name, 20 years on this road, and be thanked and sent away. He had watched his father get back into the sedan and drive north without a word. He had been carrying that for 3 weeks. He was watching something different now. He was watching Fire Chief Marcus Pell say his father's name 3 times into a camera, while his father stood at the left side of a podium and did not look at the camera, and did not look at the reporters, and did not perform anything for anyone. Calvin was looking at him. He was looking at the one person in this parking lot for whom all of this mattered most. Not the cameras, not the reporters, not the council members or the city manager or the county representative. The one person who had been in the passenger seat on the shoulder of Route 7 and had not looked away. The one person who was 16 and was still building what he was going to believe about the world. Calvin was still looking at Darius when Pell finished his remarks. He did not move his gaze when the reporters began asking questions. He watched his son near the bay door, and his son watched him, and neither of them looked away. Greer's stop documentation was reviewed 3 weeks later after a resident who had been driving past the stop filed a formal complaint with the Lakemore Police Department. The resident had recognized Calvin at the stop. He had written down what he saw, the time, the location, the duration, the presence of a witness who had stopped and been dismissed. He had waited 3 weeks not certain it was his right to act, and then he had decided it was, and he had filed the complaint. The department's review board examined Greer's incident report against the documented timeline the registered witness who had identified Calvin by name and business and town contract during the stop and the complaint. The board found that the incident report did not meet the department's standard for articulated reasonable suspicion as documented. A formal written notice was issued. Mandatory refresher training in stop documentation procedures was required. The finding was entered permanently in Greer's service record. It was not the end of a career. It was the beginning of a record that would not go away. A record that would be there the next time something needed reviewing. And the time after that. Greer was on patrol on Route 7 when he received the notification about the review findings. He read it twice. He did not know that Calvin had never filed anything himself. He did not know that the complaint had come from a witness acting independently 3 weeks after the fact. He did not know about the envelope in the attorney's office. He did not know the name Darius Briggs. He sat in his patrol unit for a moment. Then he put the notification away and went back to running plates on vehicles he did not recognize. Some things move slowly. Some things move in ways that are not visible from the surface. Some things simply accumulate the way wear accumulates in a relay over thousands of cycles, until one day the contact surface can no longer carry the load it was given. Calvin had taught Darius to look for the wear before it failed. He had taught him to look every time. Part 6, what he said when he looked. They closed the shop together that evening. The bay doors came down in order from 4 to 1. The lifts were lowered to their resting positions. The tools went back to their drawers, each one in its place. The fluid containers were sealed and moved to the shelf. The trouble lights were hung on their hooks. The floor was swept. They did this every evening. They had done it together for years. When it was done, Darius sat on the edge of the workbench near Bay 3. The same workbench where he had been cleaning calipers on the Saturday afternoon 3 weeks before, when the day had started as an ordinary Saturday and become something else. He sat the way he always sat there, easily, without ceremony, in a place that was as familiar as any place in his life. He said, "Why didn't you call me?" "When the chief called you?" Calvin was wiping down the top of the tool chest. He said, "Because you were in school." Darius said, "I would have come." Calvin said, "I know." They were quiet for a moment. Darius said, "What did the relay look like when it failed?" Calvin set down the rag. He described it. He described the degradation at the contact surfaces, the carbon tracking that develops over high cycle use, the way the resistance climbs gradually past the reliable threshold, the particular reading on the meter that tells you the contact is no longer carrying load the way it needs to. He described the color of the failed component when he removed it. He described the installation of the replacement and what the circuit reading looked like afterward. He described it in the same terms he used when he was teaching. Not simplified, not elevated, just accurate. Darius listened without interrupting. When Calvin finished, Darius said, "That is the same part we keep 3 of in the shop." Calvin said, "Yes, it fails predictably on high-cycle vehicles. You keep it ready." Darius said, "You knew exactly where it was." Calvin said, "I know where everything is. He said it without pride and without understatement, in the flat, matter-of-fact voice of a man describing a condition of his life that he has made true by choosing it every day for 20 years. Darius was quiet for a while. He looked at the wall where the certification and the press conference transcript sat side by side in their frames. He said your name 3 times. Calvin said you mentioned that. Darius said, I know. I keep thinking about it. Calvin said, what do you think about it? Darius said, I think about Route 7, and I think about the firehouse, and I think about how both of those things happened in the same 3 weeks, and during both of them you were just working. You were just working the whole time, before, during, and after. Calvin looked at him. He said the work does not stop because someone gets it wrong, and it does not start because someone finally gets it right. The work is the work. That is the only thing you have full control over. You do not have control over what other people decide to see. You have control over what you actually do. Darius held this. He was 16, and he was learning what a life built on that principle looked like when it was tested in the same week from opposite directions. He said, were you listening when the chief said your name? Calvin said I was looking at you. Darius looked at his father. He did not deflect this, and he did not perform a reaction to it. He held it the way he held things that mattered directly without looking away. He said, why? Calvin said, because the chief saying my name in front of cameras is not the point. The point is whether you can see what the work actually is, what it has been, what it will still be when no one is watching. He looked at the certification on the wall. He said, I have been putting things in this shop for 20 years. The certification, the service log, the contracts, the parts tray in the truck. I have been building something. I wanted you to be able to see it from the outside the way other people see it, because you are always inside it. You have been inside it your whole life. I wanted you to see it from where the chief was standing. Darius looked at the wall for a long time. He said, I see it. 2 weeks after the press conference, the Lakemore Town Council sent a formal letter of commendation to Briggs Automotive, signed by all 5 members. The letter described the fire response and the role of the shop's service contract in enabling it. The council member who had been at the press conference had added a handwritten note at the bottom of the page in blue ink separate from the printed text. The note said, "We know what this shop means to this town." Calvin read the letter twice. He folded it and then he unfolded it and read it a 3rd time. He put it on the desk in the back office weighted by the parts catalog. The press conference footage ran on 2 regional television affiliates that evening and again the following morning. It circulated in automotive trade communities and was picked up by several accounts with regional audiences. The Automotive Service Excellence organization featured Calvin in their monthly bulletin, a profile of a master technician in Lakemore, who had held all 8 certifications for 9 years and demonstrated at a fire response what those credentials meant in practical terms. Calvin did not watch the news. He did not read the bulletin. He was aware it existed. He knew what had happened, and he knew what it meant, and the knowing was enough. He did not need it reflected back. He printed the fire chief's remarks from the press conference transcript, the full text, everything Pell had said at the podium, and framed them. He hung the frame on the wall beside the certification close enough that you could see both of them from anywhere in the front of the shop without having to look twice. A week later, Darius came in after school and found the shop empty. The mechanics had finished early. Calvin had stepped out to pick up a part. Darius set his bag down near the workbench and looked at the wall. He read the transcript. He read it again. He read it a 3rd time, more slowly, letting each sentence settle. When Calvin came back with the part, Darius was still looking at the wall. He said your name 3 times. Calvin set the part on the bench and pulled off his jacket. He said, you have said that before. Darius said, I know. The 3rd time is different. Calvin said, why? Darius said the first time he was identifying you. The 2nd time he was making sure everyone understood. The 3rd time he was saying it because it was true, and he wanted it to be the last thing people remembered. He turned from the wall and looked at his father. He said, that is the 3rd time that matters. Calvin looked at him for a moment. He looked at the wall. He picked up the part he had just brought in and checked it against the work order on the bench. He said, let's get back to work. Darius picked up his shop gloves. They went back to work. The shop on Route 7 ran the same on every day after, as it had run on every day before the bays occupied the lifts. Active, the smell of gear oil and brake compound and warm engine metal in the air, and two people working beside each other in the quiet, fluent language of a craft that had been built over 20 years, one honest repair at a time. On the wall, the certification and the transcript sat together. They had been earned at different prices in different kinds of time through different kinds of reckoning. But they said the same thing about the man who had put them there. Quiet dignity does not announce itself. It accumulates. And when the moment comes that asks what you are made of, everything you have built is already there, waiting to answer. The shop was still open. The work continued. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about someone you know who carries themselves the way Calvin carries himself, subscribe, so you do not miss the next one. Every week there is a new story about what it looks like when a life built on integrity meets the moment that finally asks for it. Leave a comment below and share who in your life reminds you of Calvin Briggs, the person who never makes noise about what they carry and never stops carrying it. Like this video if you believe that quiet excellence maintained over years is one of the most powerful things a human being can build. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. We will see you in the next story.